Welcome to Season 4 of the Paleo Post podcast, your one-stop shop for all things human evolution, ancient art, and the stories that connect us all. I'm Seth Chagi, joined by my fantastic co-hosts Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Nash. This season, we're taking you on a journey across continents and millennia, from the mysteries of rock art to the exciting prospects of my upcoming move to Portugal. We'll be chatting with some incredible guests, diving deep into the art and culture of our ancestors, and exploring the cutting edge of paleoanthropology. So buckle up for this season full of discovery, fresh perspectives, and a few surprises along the way. Hit the subscribe button and join us as we uncover the secrets of our shared past and chart new paths for the future. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Paleo Post podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Seth Chagi, joined by the wonderful Genevieve von Petzinger. And today we have a massive, and I mean massive, episode for you. It's going to be a review of some of the biggest topics that came out from the world of anthropology, paleoanthropology, archaeology, and rock art research over the last year. Originally, we were going to dive into a few specific papers, but the field has just been moving so fast that we decided to scrap that script and go big. We're talking themes, mysteries, and honestly, we're talking about rewriting what we know about a lot of aspects of our ancestors' history. So today we're going to be heading to the islands of Indonesia to look at the oldest rock art in the world, over 67,000 years old, asking the question, who painted it? Then we're swinging back to Ethiopia to talk about a brand new unnamed species of Australopithecine that was living side by side with our own genus. Okay. We're going to be going back to Europe and talking about some significant rock art discoveries, as well as new interpretations of some of the previously known rock art examples that we have. So, how are you, Genevieve? Before we begin, let's do a little face touching.
I know. Yeah, we've been so busy lately, and we've had so many different guests on that we haven't kind of done our little catch-ups. But yes, no, exactly. It's going very well. I'm deep in my artificial intelligence archive project, which is, we just did the first big demo a couple days ago. So that was very exciting. That go? Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, there was a couple pipeline hiccups, but again, we're wiring together like a graph database with an artificial intelligence and basically turning it into like our librarian, right? So this is where now the librarian has to practice.
Yes.
And so this is where, and again, because this isn't something that's been done before, so we're in uncharted territory and we're actually having to design it as we go, which to me is like so much fun, because it's like we're getting to custom build our own research tool for our field. So I mean, cool. It's really cool, because it's like, it's not just like, oh, theoretically, how would we do this? It's like, no, here's the solution we're trying to get to. Here's the problem. How do we solve this, right? Because I mean, with AI, this has been the year of AI in so many ways, right? Yeah. And particularly LLMs. So those are large language models, which are the chat GPTs and other frontier models. And this has been such a changeover year in a lot of ways for how we do research and where we get our information and how we know what we know. And so one of the big challenges with having LLMs, I mean, again, they're extraordinary tools. So this is not meant as any sort of slam that way. I think it's amazing, and I think the possibilities are huge. But LLMs have also created a really weird problem around the fact that we don't know what's true anymore sometimes, because they have problems with hallucinations. And so from, like if you're just wanting to like quickly just look up a recipe for something, it's, it doesn't matter that much if you put, half a teaspoon.
I don't know. When LLMs first started coming out, they were telling people to like microwave the weirdest things that would probably kill you if you ate them. So I always tell people, no matter what you're doing, you need to triple and double check everything that it outputs. So
yeah, it's better. Like they've definitely put some better safeguards in place. It's being a little bit more sensible. The problem is, though, and this is where I know colleagues who teach university have really struggled with this with students too, though, which is that the problem is that because of the way large language models are trained, they get fed lots of academic data, We won't talk about whether that data is being properly cited or not. That's a whole other. We'll leave that debate. Next season we'll talk about it. But let's just say the problem is, though, as an LLM, it doesn't remember the author connected with the information. That's not how it works. And so the problem is it may have some correct-ish information in there, but it doesn't know where it came from. And so as academics, we need sources of reliable truth. And this is where one of the things that we're doing with the AI project that we're working on here is, how do we create a source of truth in the field that is actually reliable? And so that way you're not worrying that it's making up or squishing two things together or like doing those sorts of things. So this is where I feel like 2026 is going to be a very interesting year, when hopefully now we start to mature into, okay, this is amazing technology. Now, how do we start moving it towards the next version of itself? How do we get to AI 2.0 when it starts to be more reliable and usable as, as a research tool, without leading us all astray or making us microwave weird stuff? So that's
very
what I've
good point. Yes,
been very deep down that. Super fun, super interesting. But yeah, no, that's where it's been definitely a busy year with working on that. And then just, I mean, man, there's been so many incredible, just like life changes too. I mean, like for both of us, like, beginning of January last year, I mean, you were in California, I was still in Victoria, Canada. Now you're in Portugal, I'm in Abu Dhabi. Like we've moved around the globe, things are happening,
yes.
So yeah, it's been a really busy year, hey? And I think within that, this has been a really busy year in the field too. But I mean, how are you doing too? We should touch base with you as well before we deep dive into the article.
I am doing, I whenever anyone asks me that question, I have a very simple answer. I wouldn't change a single thing about my current situation or where I am, except for those of you who know, I'm still trying to get my family here, and the bureaucracy is very difficult. But yesterday, actually, there was the first inkling of a sign that the government procedures were processing. I got an email. It wasn't even addressed to me. It said sir or madam.
Oh my goodness. But you'll
yeah.
take it.
Right, I'll take it. It was something, but actually, because as a requirement of the program I'm in, on March 2nd, we are traveling to Italy for some sort of conference. And in order to do that, we have to have our residency permits. So now this university is taking over, trying to expedite that process, which is just going to get me my family here sooner. So I'm very happy that's happening. And then yesterday, I finished my first paper for submission to a peer-reviewed journal. So I'm very excited about that. Thank you. I'm very, very excited about that. And then I also found out yesterday a final confirmation. I did announce this a few weeks ago, but I guess it wasn't final. I am going, and this will tie directly into our first story that we're going to discuss. I am going to Indonesia in the end of April to the middle of May for this field program, human origins thing, and it's going to be quite interesting. I'll be living in a village for a few weeks. Very excited about that.
That's so fun though. Field work's the best, and it's like, and I mean, we talked about this before, I think, but both of us being in North America, but studying like ancient art and things which are, again, not that there's not ancient art in the Americas, but it is more complex, and much of that art is still very culturally significant to the folks whose ancestors made it, and therefore it is a very different situation to be, that it's not our art to study unless we are very much invited, right? Whereas there's other parts of the world where it's so old and no longer really associated necessarily with specific people who are still actively practicing it. So being able to be closer to places where field work is there, it's exciting, hey?
Yes.
Well, I mean, you get, I think we talked about this. You literally live, your backyard now is like the Okresa Valley, right?
Yes, exactly. It's
right. So you're like, oh, look, it's
I wouldn't want to walk
art.
it, but I think it's in walking distance, honestly.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very exciting to be in
Yeah.
such a different, and obviously the to say the land is older is not technically true because all Earth is the Earth, but the habitation of the land is farther in deep history than what I'm used to, as you were mentioning. So that's definitely a bounty to my research, and I'm very excited to be here. And of course, there were Neanderthals here. Like that's just
No.
I will
Right?
say one professor did try to tell me there were Neanderthals in North America, and I kind of had to roll my eyes a bit at that. But
Yeah.
there are Neanderthals here, or
Yeah.
were in Portugal.
Yeah.
Um, so very, very exciting.
Yeah,
And
well, I think
so,
though I just have to jump in
yeah,
on the Neanderthal
yeah,
thing though, right? Which is that, I mean, I think for listeners as well, here's what's really important to understand. We just don't actually have any convincing evidence that either Neanderthals or Denisovans made it over to North America. It's not that we're against the concept. It's more just that at this point in time, there's just not, we just don't have the sites. And,
right,
so this is where I would just like to flag that because I mean, again, this is where Beringia did exist at different points throughout the last probably like I mean as ice ages wax and wane the land bridge would come back up and go down again. So I wouldn't say never. I would just say at the moment it's just we're not seeing it.
yeah,
But I think that's where I mean in a way this is literally the whole theme of the show today because we decided there was two themes, right? Which is
yes.
things that we didn't know and then things that we were like, ha, I knew it. So those are pretty much the two themes from the last year. And I think it's going to be the themes going forward as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I would bet money on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say the first story though falls into the ha, I knew it, at least for me. That was how I felt about it when I heard about it.
Yeah, so why don't we jump right
Do
into
it.
our first story, which, as I mentioned, ties into me visiting Indonesia later in
Yes,
the
it
year.
does.
So just this past week, a new paper came out citing what is now known as the oldest rock art,
Mhm.
not in Indonesia, not in Asia, but the world,
Yep.
dating to at least 67,000 years old, give or take, the typical range of about 4,000 years.
Yeah.
And this art was found on Muna Island in Sulawesi and comprises of both this ancient art and a little more recent art. One thing I want to mention right now is if you've seen, and I'm sure many of you have, pictures of for articles and whatnot, I've noticed they're not actually showing what is the oldest part of this motif, which is the hand stencils. They're showing the much more vibrant
The
humanoid.
hand stencils are underneath it. It's just you can't
Exactly,
really
but
see it. Yeah, that's what you're gonna say. Yeah, you
exactly.
can't really see it. Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of news outlets could do perhaps a better job of showing the
Do
actual.
people get confused because well of course it makes sense, right? So then they're seeing the art and they're like, oh,
Yeah.
the bright art's the 67.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought of course because my brain immediately went to the faded stuff underneath because I knew
Right,
the
right.
other stuff
But
wasn't too modern.
you have
Yeah,
an
yeah.
expert eye on
I'm a
this
lot.
sort of thing. I've had many comments throughout social media going, I don't think, people were riding horses with eagles was one interpretation
Yeah,
of
yeah. Oh my
the
gosh.
images 67,000 years ago. And I'd be,
Yeah,
okay, you're probably right, but that's not
yeah,
what we're actually looking at.
yeah.
So
Oh
what
my
we're
goodness.
looking at is hand stencils, and they're interesting hand stencils. They're not the typical just hand
No.
spit over on it. They're narrow is how they were described. And
Yeah.
I
Didn't they
put
say they painted them in or something? They think they were painted in afterwards? Like that they painted in some of the fingers to
some of them, yeah.
yeah,
Um, and so these are unique hand
yeah.
stencils. And of course, for those who know, hand stencils generally are some of the oldest examples of rock art that we have, both Neanderthal, modern human, and as we'll discuss, whoever made these markings.
Mhm.
And these markings are very important because of the date, of course. Now, this shifts what we know of who was in the area at this time. Of course, we know that modern humans were in Australia about 65,000 years ago. So this migration pathway does make sense for modern humans, but there's no confirmation that that is who did it because there's also other forms of hominins, Denisovans, the
Yeah,
Hobbit,
yeah.
Luzonensis is also in the nearby area. And it just reshapes how we think of the migration pattern through this area and, again, who the authors could be. And so, yeah, what are your interpretations of these
Mhm.
new ancient hand stencils?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think so. First of all, I mean, exactly as I said at the beginning, I knew it. So because it, it, we're, I mean, this is again like everywhere. This is such a classic example, though, of like it's not that there's not ancient rock art in many parts of the world. It's more that people had not previously found it, identified it, documented it, whatever version they're of. Because often locals know about it, but like
Mm.
it's so this is such a classic example of Adi and the team in Indonesia in sort of working in partnership, of course, with the colleagues in Australia like Maxime Aubert. Like this is where they're on a very active mission now. They're surveying, like they're starting to survey areas of Sulawesi areas of Indonesia, knowing that everywhere they're looking, they're finding caves, and it's not even just one. Like they're publishing, them as they get new results, but like there's
Mm.
lots of caves coming out. So this is the thing is that I mean, I think by the time we're done with this, the area, so this is Sundaland during the sort of Paleolithic, this was often called, because of course during the Ice Age, the water levels were much lower. And so this was actually a huge continental, like sort of block of land that was connected by a land bridge to Asia. And then with just a little, comparatively little amount of water that needed to be crossed to get to Australia. So this is where it was a very different landscape than what we see now with all the different archipelagos of islands. And so this was more, it was one huge, so picture it out of the water, lots of different movement around. I'm not sure exactly what the environment was. I suspect it was probably slightly less jungly, but I could be wrong. Just because of the way it was with the Ice Age, the overall temperatures were a bit lower. So this is where, to me, I think this is more a wonderful sign of what's to come, which is that again, as they continue to expand, as they're everywhere they're moving into new areas, they're finding art. And so I think we're
Yes.
going to end up with another concentration like Western Europe, like how
Mm.
northern Spain and like that sort of southern part, southeast, well, southwest kind of corner of France into northern Spain, like huge concentrations of art, or like the Coa Valley, or like there's areas where these big concentrations where obviously lots of people were living in the vicinity. I mean, lots
Mm.
comparatively, right? So
Right.
I mean, tens of thousands to kind of like I mean during the Ice Age, I mean it was say maybe 100,000 people lived in
Mm.
Western Europe. It's just not a lot. It's just, they're spread out, but enough people that you've got different groups living in different areas, making art, doing their thing. I mean, I think for me one of the big questions is was a couple, as you said, the art was covered up at 67,000.
Yes.
So again, for viewers and listeners, like just, I mean, I'm sure by now most of you know how to uranium series dating works, but basically in a cave, when you get the white sort of translucent stuff that drips down the walls and creates what's called calcite layers on the walls, those have groundwater with uranium in them, and uranium over time degrades into other elements that don't naturally exist there. So if they exist, we know it's because uranium's been there for a while and it's been degrading. They can measure that. That's how they can tell how old it is. In this case, again, there was calcite that covered it at around 67 to 70,000 years ago. It got covered. We don't actually know how old it is. And you can see from the photos how faded it is. Like it's very
Yes.
old and faded. And so, I mean, I'm very, that's, it, I mean, I hope in the future, maybe we could even, might be possible to extract genetic material. I know that's a lot harder in that part of the world just because of the warmth and everything, that the DNA degrades faster. But with the new techniques and stuff, I mean, that'd be extraordinary, because then you can start figuring out who the actual artists were, which would be really, really cool. With it being at least 67 to 70,000 is an interesting question too, because so this leads into a couple more papers that have kind of come out in the last year or so as well. This past year, they also had new genetic paper that came out that was showing really clearly, based on the genetics, just even the genetics alone, and so it matches the archaeology and also the oral history of the first people of Australia, that they were already in Australia like 60,000 years ago. And so this is, again, fits with, we're all part of the L3 haplogroup. We're living in East Africa, say 90-ish, 80-ish thousand years ago. I mean, again, not everyone, but the ancestors of almost 7 billion people come from that one area. It's crazy. So we're really closely related. And then again, they moved out in these little groups. They're walking out. They're going into Asia. They're going through India. They're going up into Europe. Like they're just, again, they're meandering. Like nobody's got the map that says, right, we're off to Sudaland in Australia, right? Like this
Could have
is,
been called the Neanderthals.
yeah, the Neanderthals. Oh my gosh. Trademark. That's a good one.
Right, honestly.
Neanderthals. We just meandered. Oh my God, that's good. Well done. I'm going to totally use that. But yes, but they meandered, right? They were just chilling. They were just kind of going, following the marine resources, following herds. The next mountain looks green. Let's go, right? Again, this the other piece of this, of course, we can't forget, is that I believe this area may have actually still been an island at the edge of Sudaland. Am I right? I think this was actually an island, and I believe they did
Not
have
100% sure on that. Yeah, I'm not. I don't remember.
it because I seem to remember them saying that this was also interesting evidence of early watercraft use. Now, you're gonna check it, aren't you?
Yeah,
check it first.
I got my little checker as we talk.
Do it. Check it because it caught my attention. So, pardon me if I'm wrong. You can always edit it out. But I'm pretty sure I saw something in there. But that fits with, again, the bigger crossing to Australia that had to be made later on.
Exactly. And, as we'll talk about, and as I sort of alluded to, there were a number of species that would have been responsible for these hand stencils.
Yep.
Yes, Muna was an island.
Yeah, I thought so.
During this time period.
Yeah. Yeah, like it was close, but still, they would have had to raft out to it or something. So it was also an example of hominins, whether Homo sapien or other, because we're going to circle back to what you were just saying, but that they had to use boats to get to that spot.
Yeah,
which is very interesting. So I think that this is where they're, and this is for viewers, like every single new site is not even just, oh, cool, there's hands in there, but it's also all of the other data that comes around it. Like, oh, they were using watercraft to get to places to do art, right? Like, we don't know what else they might have been doing there, which is really, really interesting to wonder, were they hunting something, or was there particularly tasty mango trees that grew there? Like, what drew them to that island, right? And so, but then the point that you're making, which is interesting as well, because the hands do have some interesting peculiarities to them, and because it's so early. So just my little piece I was going to say was that if our ancestors from the L3 haplogroup who split up around the world left around 70-ish thousand years ago, which is approximately, would they have already been there like early enough to make those hands?
Yeah.
Right?
It's
so now,
a very good question.
Because that's a pretty quick meander, right? Knowing that it was more of a slow wander.
Yeah.
More what happened. Yeah. So tell me now this leads exactly into, and I mean, the authors of the paper did flag that too, that they don't know for sure it's human. But tell me else. Who are the usual suspects? Who's hanging out there?
Well, am I pronounced the name wrong? Aubert,
yeah, Maxime
Aubert team actually does suggest that it could be Denisovan authorship. And this would be 30,000 years, give or take, of course, before Homo sapiens even reached Europe. So this is pretty significant in the overall arching history of rock and cave art. But it's also important to note that we're aware of, there were also the Hobbit, Homo florenziensis, and Homo luzonensis, who is very closely related to Florenziensis. Although, on my limited experience and knowledge, I would probably rule them out just on the shape and size of the actual hand stencils.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, you would assume they would actually be hobbit sized if they were made by hobbits, and they're actually long.
Full-sized hands,
Yeah,
but small
exactly.
stature. That would be
Yeah,
weird.
and they're actually longer in the fingers
Yep.
than most hand stencils. And that, as I will hope you'll explain, could be caused by a few reasons.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so if we're really going to nail down who it was, it's really either modern humans,
Mhm.
which would put them in this area earlier than expected, although not out of the range
No,
of
no,
possibility,
no.
or it was Denisovans. And if that's the case, to my knowledge, this will be the first example of Denisovan rock art that we can actually attribute to that group of humans.
Yes, it would
Um,
be.
so it has a lot of questions that we still have to look into and answer. And as you were talking about, they're finding more caves all the time.
Mhm.
And when you look at the images of these hand stencils, which we'll have on screen, they could have been missed very easily. They were,
Mhm.
obviously, for a
Yep.
while until they were
Yep.
discovered. And I would assume there's many other locations like this because, as common sense states, pigment fades over time. And if there's superpositions of more recent rock art that's more vivid on top of it, it's going to take an expert eye, and maybe even more than that, a digital eye, to really see what's underneath, which would, of course, be older.
Yep.
So there's a lot going on in this area at this time.
Yeah, well, and then of course, the older it is, the more faded it's likely to be.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that again, the fact that we're dealing with, I mean, that kind of like that is extremely old dates. If you actually think about something, because I mean, basically the red ochre that they're using in many cases is like it's like iron oxide, it's like a type of rust, which is why it sticks so well to the walls and
Yeah.
does stain it. But even so, I mean, 70,000 years potentially, like it's been sitting on a wall. That's wild that there's anything left. Like and
Yeah.
this is why caves are so amazing. They're like little time capsules, right? Because the added protection of the cave helps preserve the remnants of these really old things. But I mean, I think it plays into as well. I mean, the other thing was that in recent years they've been talking about as well that like that part of the world, like what's now the archipelago, but used to be again another continent, basically another big chunk of land. Um, the first peoples in those areas have the highest percentage of Denisovan DNA in their DNA of anywhere in the world, whether it's the Melanesians or and we were just talking about the Aita in the Philippines, because again
Yeah.
that was part of the same continent, and the Aita still, I mean, they still live in their ancestral territory in the Philippines, and I believe for an ethnic group they have the single highest, even higher than the Papua New Guinea folks. So I mean that's high, like 5% Denisovan, I think they said on average with the Aita. So here's again, to the best of my knowledge, nobody has ever done any survey work with the Aita if they were open to it. I mean, who knows what could be sitting there? And I think,
Exactly.
and then weren't you saying something too about the fact that there's actually two strains of Denisovan DNA, which is a bit different?
Yes, not necessarily in that specific area, but just
No,
overall.
no, but
So
overall,
there's the northern, like, frozen tundra
yeah,
Denisovans that we've typically known until this point, but now we know of a more tropic southern Asia um, distinct lineage of Denisovans, where of course their genomes will vary slightly in the ways that they do. And this, I think, is very important to a more overall discussion of Pleistocene hominin
yep,
cultures, perhaps, and identities, because what really, from my thinking, creates these different lineages are two things, of course, or three, I guess: space and time.
yep,
If they're separated long enough, they will develop changes to the ecological niches and whatnot. This is typical adaptation to environment. But also, as we were discussing before this show started, there was the discovery of Thorin, the last Neanderthal at
yep,
Mandrin Cave in France. And that Neanderthal had a very distinct genomic pattern compared to other Neanderthals of the area. He actually matched the Neanderthals from Gibraltar rather
yeah,
than other French, Spanish Neanderthals. And the reason given for this was that there was some sort of cultural barrier because you literally have the river. I can't remember this name of the specific river. On one side, you have these Neanderthals, and on this side, you have literally other Neanderthals. That a river is not enough separation for non-cultural differences to arise. So the idea is there was some sort of social taboo
or like an intentional, like
yeah, an
they
intentional
intentionally did
separation.
not interact with
Yeah,
each other. Yeah, like do not
exactly.
cross the river. The
Yeah, yeah.
bad Neanderthals live over
Those are the
there.
bad
Yeah,
Neanderthals on that side of the river. You don't
totally.
we tell our kids not to go over there,
We don't talk to those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
well, I think though that this, I know we were going to go to Africa next, but I think you know what? Let's roll with this because I think this is important, and
Yeah.
I think this plays into again a bigger theme, which I mean I think you're starting to explore this as part of your graduate work too, which is exciting. But we've traditionally treated all the non-modern human species, so all the non-Homo sapiens, we treat them as monolithic blocks. Like we say, Neanderthals did this, right? And we treat them
Yeah.
like they're somehow cookie cutter. It doesn't matter if they're up in the Arctic Circle because we got evidence of Neanderthals living up above the 60th degree line. Like they're up in the Arctic Circle. We have Neanderthals living down in Jordan in the Middle East. Like they're all over the place, right? Like, we've got them in Gibraltar. So these are not one Neanderthal.
Exactly.
These are not one Denisovan. But and it's not like people are intentionally trying not to separate them. It was more that I don't think we understood enough like how potentially different they could be, because in a way it's like it's the layer of culture that then like it's the blanket of culture that creates more than like, the finch from here versus the finch from there that's slightly different, right? Like, oh, there maybe there's a few biological differences, but overall, or like in Canada, I'll use the example of like brown bears versus polar bears, right? Those
Mhm.
guys split about 500,000 years ago. That's it. 500,000 years ago, there was no polar bears. They were all brown bears. Isn't that wild? And in
Yeah.
500,000, half a million years, they went from looking like big brown bears to being huge, white, fluffy things that are like marine animals, basically, and who consider humans to be tasty snacks too. Shout out to all the Northerners in Canada. So whereas brown bears more tend to be annoyed by us but not want to eat us. But, different ecological niches, completely different appearances.
Mhm.
But again, a brown bear is going to stick out like a sore thumb on the ice sheets. So
Yes.
think
Yeah.
about how much change that can happen. But that's just biological change. Like in that sense, we're talking, as you said, change of what the environment, the change of, maybe the species they eat or whatever, right? Like there are those things. Now, that would be one thing. But I think one of the big, really in the last probably decade or two, probably, but it feels like it's accelerating as we learn more. And maybe part of it is us being open to seeing it. Because I think part of it was we didn't want to see it before because we didn't think it existed.
Yes.
I think there's a whole thing right there. But that it would not be surprising that there would be Denisovans maybe doing one thing down in the tropical islands who were now quite different than the Denisovans living up on the Tibetan plateau. Just as how, if we think about cultural differences between, modern day people living up on the Tibetan plateau, and then people living down in like the Andaman Islands.
Yeah.
Like these are completely different cultures, different ways of organizing themselves, traditions, and now there's so many different layers to what makes them different. Like what makes them, well, I don't want to say different because I don't like what makes them distinct. The things
Distinct.
about them that make them distinct. And I think that and often in very interesting ways, like these hands having these, I believe they said it was they'd actually filled them in partially to make them look more pointy. Fascinating, right? Super interesting. And so
Yeah, they
that
actually refer to them
sounds,
as claws.
yeah,
If
so
you
like definitely like some sort of cultural overlay. This wasn't just like here's my hand on a wall. They modified it for some reason we don't know. Now could have also been early humans for sure. But this is where it would be, and I mean, my mission is to start trying to fill in the blanks between that eastern part of Africa and how they moved out. Because I mean, this is where we don't know where hands came from. At this
Mhm.
point in time, we have no hands from that kind of time frame anywhere remotely around where we know our collective ancestors came from. And so it's, I mean, it's such a fascinating question, which I think George and I were joking around with you about this. Like, I feel like just not quite recently, we were laughing about, who taught who how to make
Yes.
hands,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You know, and so here we have the Denisovans also making hands, potentially. We don't know.
Potentially.
Could also be Homo sapien. But, this is where, like, I feel like we're going to learn so many new things. And I think it's going to keep blowing our minds when we understand how much we had in common with these cousin species.
Yes.
And I think it's so exciting because in Neanderthals, it's the same thing, which is that it's not just physical barriers. Maybe there was cultural taboos and social layers, which makes them so much more complex and interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this long-standing idea that kind of sums up a lot of what we're talking about here, that evolution is a linear ladder that is aiming to create the perfect specimen instead of
Yeah.
went here, that went there. Neanderthals were extraordinarily successful for their
Yeah.
time, for their ecological niches, for what they did. They didn't build planes and skyscrapers, not because they potentially couldn't. I mean, maybe they couldn't, we'll never know, but
Mhm.
they didn't need to. They were doing what they needed. They survived for 400,000 years in Europe, which is longer than we've been around so far.
Yeah.
And the idea of modern human exceptionalism, I think, is an idea that is currently being buried, and for
Yeah.
good reason,
Yeah.
because we, many of us automatically assume we're better because we're
Yeah.
here. We're still here. But that's not the case.
No.
There's other reasons why we're here, and there's reasons other species did go extinct, but it's not because we're better.
No.
And of course, we might be more complex in certain ways, but we're not better. And I think that's an important thing
Yeah.
for a lot of
Well,
researchers to start digesting.
yeah. Well, and also, I mean, if we're seeing 5% Denisovan in a population, if we're seeing 2 to 4% Neanderthal in another population, I mean, I do lean more towards the school of thought that if you think about how long it's been since the last Neanderthal, like purely Neanderthal was alive, that's still a fairly significant presence in our DNA. So
Yeah,
that, because over time, just for folks to understand, like, I mean, it's constantly resorting and resorting. And because the way the DNA splits out, you only have a 50-50 shot of your Neanderthal DNA even making it to the next round, right? And so over time, that's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so if we're thinking about, like, if we're thinking about the what happened, I mean, is it maybe more that we kind of absorbed them? Like I think that there has more of a feel like in these places that they're not really gone. It's more just that we
yeah,
amalgamated, kind of like, I mean, like how, I mean, there's so many parts of the world you could talk about, like somewhere like London in England, just because so many people know London. Like there used to be London, and then there was all these other villages and towns around London. London just absorbed them all, right? And they still have the names, but now they're neighborhoods within London. But those used to be
right.
separate villages where you had to actually drive with a horse and carriage to get there, right? And so, if you think about that same concept, if we just sort of absorb those guys, they may not really be extinct. It might be more that we just
Right.
amalgamated into the
And
modern
there's
things
an
we are now.
important thing. Yeah, there's an
Yeah.
important thing to note there. And there's quite a few people, and more, it seems, all the time, that are starting to argue that Neanderthals should not even be a distinct species. And if we're
Mhm.
talking very specific technical definitions of species, which is if it's the same species, they can breed and produce fertile offspring. As you were mentioning, we have Neanderthal DNA, we have Denisovan DNA. That means we did
Yeah.
interbreed with them. That's a fact. And we're fertile. So by very strict definition, they wouldn't be a separate species. Of course, if you look at the morphology, other people argue they should be a different species. And going back to your polar bear, grizzly
Yes.
bear
Yeah.
analogy, they're separate species, but they can actually interbreed as well
Well, they do, and
and
they
produce fertile
terrify us.
offspring. So that's a so we might also need to redefine really what a species is in order to gain more clarity on these distinctions between recent hominin, later hominin groups and ancestry, because it would make sense, at least in some ways, if Denisovans were humans just over here, Neanderthals were humans over here, and we're the
Yeah.
African humans. And then when we all came together, it just kind of worked out.
Yeah.
By strict the species definitions, technically, I guess we're subspecies of these different.
Yeah, that's
Well,
interesting. Yeah.
I completely forgot about
What's
this, and
that?
I'm throwing this in because I do think it's a very important topic for us to discuss for this recap. Although I think it is from this year, very early January. We researchers think they discovered the common ancestor of Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens in a
Right.
cave in Morocco. They found those 700,000-year-old jawbone and a
That's
few
right.
other
Yep.
bones. And analysis, and the location, they think there's a strong possibility that was our common ancestor. It doesn't have a species designation yet. They're still debating. Some have even said it could be Homo antecessor, because we don't
Yeah.
have much representation of that.
No.
But it just goes to show this is one of the fastest moving fields, I like to say, in all of the science kingdom, because all the time there's new discoveries, and they might not reshape all that we know, but they definitely
No.
add sometimes very large pieces to the puzzle.
So they also, though, was there not like a million-year-old? Like there was some specimen they thought might be a Denisovan ancestor in Asia somewhere. That they were arguing that the split between Denisovans and Neanderthals was actually closer to 1 million years, wasn't it? Like, wasn't that there's some
Uh,
crazy new. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is this sounding familiar?
I don't specifically, I'm checking on it right now, but
Yeah.
I do know when the fossils that I just mentioned were
Yeah.
published, Dr. Chris Stringer, who of course is a renowned expert on this topic, said that originally they did believe that the common ancestor of our three species, subspecies, whatever you want to call them, would have been more around 1 million years ago in Asia. So this find did surprise them a little bit.
Um,
So
Yun Xian 2. That's the skull. And that it was just reanalyzed in 2025 and identified as a potential early ancestor of Denisovans or closely related clade. So a closely related sort of group of them. And that this was around 1 million years ago. So I think I think maybe this is one of those ones again where we didn't even know what we don't know. And now we're like, oh,
exactly,
okay, well
yeah.
this
That's
is
very
very
true.
interesting. But I mean, I think the skull and like the remains as well, though, coming out of the skeletal remains coming out of Morocco. So we have these ancient dates. My understanding from the actual genetics, though, is that the split, because we have the genome for Denisovans, we have the genome for Neanderthals, and we have the genome for Homo sapien. So there are ways to track it backwards with certainly like to a point of like again where do the mutations converge. And so for
Yes.
folks watching and listening who may not be like all up on their ancient DNA stuff, basically what works really well with say like mitochondrial DNA or Y-DNA, I believe, is pretty good about this too, is that over time mutations happen, right? They just naturally happen, but they happen at fairly regular intervals. And so what you can measure is how the species are plunking along, same mutations are happening, they're obviously part of the same group. Things split off. Now these folks are no longer interbreeding with these people. So if a mutation happens here, it doesn't reflect over here anymore. And so what they measure is what was the last common mutation people had, and then what's one
Yes.
where it should have showed up on both sides if they were still hanging out together, but now it's not. And so this is where my understanding was based on that thread of evidence that it was sitting around 700,000 ish was the split, I think, based on mutations and genetics entirely, like just based on that line of it. Um, and so this is where the Moroccan one falls into line with that. I think the one in
Yeah.
Asia is an interesting curveball. And again, though, I mean, I think this is where we don't know what that means yet. And that's exciting
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
cool. And we
Very.
also know that Homo erectus was floating around 1 million years ago. There was also Asian Homo erectus, which we can't forget about.
That's
Those guys
another
were,
important thing that came out this last year that we neglected to mention in our pre-show notes was we now think Erectus left Africa much earlier, or I've seen articles, I'll be honest, I haven't read them, that other species left before Erectus. And
Mhm.
that's where Homo georgicus could be different. Well, Homo georgicus is a potential different name for the Dmanisi
Yeah.
erectus fossils. So there's just a lot going on, especially in the realm of the Neanderthals and what they were doing, which we'll use
Yeah.
as a colloquium of all of the
Yeah.
wandering hominins of
Yeah.
this era.
Our close cousins that we don't know quite, or potentially almost like what they call sister species, like very very very
Yes.
small split, and I think
Yeah.
though again this is where, going back to the bigger question, thinking about genetics and species and how is it, I mean this is such a great example though too of the fact that it's not like one night they went to sleep and they were one species and then they woke up in the morning and they had a memo that said, today you've now become a new species. you know, Yesterday Homo
That's a
erectus,
very
today
good
we're Homo
point.
erectus.
Yeah. That's a
So,
very
you
good
know,
point that I see
yeah,
used actually quite a bit in creationist counter arguments where they're
yeah,
trying to find, quote, the missing link or something, where
yeah.
for some reason they think
The magical
because
day.
an animal didn't wake up, yeah, as you
Yeah,
said, like because an animal didn't wake up the next day as a different species, evolution is thus false, and there's
yeah,
no transition species, which as students of paleoanthropology, we know is completely false. There are many transitory species that show a mosaic of features. But yes, I guess I actually can think of one creature that did potentially wake up that way, and I'm trying to remember their name, but it's the only example that we have fossil evidence of where I believe it was a modern human and a Denisovan. Was that Denny? I don't remember.
oh, that was half Neanderthal, half
I'm
Denisovan.
looking it
That
up
was
now.
Denny. Yeah,
That's
90,000
Neanderthal.
years
Okay.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Denisova
But
11. Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, that's one way. I mean, just literally throw a whole new genome into the mix.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
the other one, I was just reading. There was a new story. It was out of Australia where I think it was a species of gecko that in real time is transitioning from laying eggs to laying live lizards because of the
I
environmental
think I
change.
saw that as well.
Yeah,
Another
and
article I
I,
didn't
I
read.
remember clocking being
Yeah.
like, this is the kind of thing, right? So obviously, this particular species has the flexibility to do. I think it's probably just holding the eggs in longer, and then the eggs hatch internally is what it's doing, and then out they come.
Yeah.
But
I
because
mean,
of the change,
lizards are
yeah, they're
weird.
fascinating,
Lizards
right?
are weird. They're
Yeah,
they're lizards and why am I blanking on like what all of those are called? Like crocodiles aren't lizards, they're whatever. But that whole
yeah.
area of animal
That
life,
piece of the family tree,
yeah,
like that big tree of life.
there are multiple species, maybe even some snakes where we
Yeah,
know, for instance, they can mate and then 5 months later they can become pregnant from the mating like months previous, and
yeah,
it's immaculate conception. Of course, it's
yeah.
not. Like they
No,
actually
but
like
they preserved
store,
it.
yeah, they've
Preserved it.
preserved the genetic material until it's more favorable for them
Yeah,
to give birth. So
yeah. Well, that's like
yeah,
in a much smaller version of that. I mean, yeah, like we just, um, I mean, but also, I mean, some of those we could go down a whole rabbit hole, which we won't do today, though it'd be
yeah.
fun. But I mean, again, like, I think, I think our viewers and listeners don't know, but I actually own a camel. Her name is Warda, which means rose in Arabic, and she just had a baby. Yay! Who I've named Blossom, which is Nawada in Arabic. so but so camels can actually choose, like camel pregnancies can last from 13 to 15 months on average based on conditions.
Hmm.
So again, they can actually keep the baby in for longer, which is wild. So I mean, I think this is
Yeah.
where it's like there there's so much there's so much flexibility, but it's like over time changes, and this is where the way I've explained it to undergrads before when I've taught and things like that, is that sometimes it's a trait that's just floating around as an option, that when times are good and things are pretty stable really makes neither a difference neither here nor there,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not, but things change and suddenly, the geckos that can actually hold the eggs in and, have a live birth, protect their eggs don't get dried out from being like, so again, they're the ones who then successfully have the offspring who go on to have offspring. And
Yeah.
suddenly more and more of the geckos have that particular gene, like which allows them to have live births. And next thing you know, suddenly this is part of what their species does, and they can no longer do eggs. Like with enough time and enough, sort of like, so it's like, I think that's where there's there's a whole lot going on back in that. What do they call it? The muddle in the middle.
Yes.
The
Although
muddle in the middle.
I've heard that refer to different periods of time.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
there's like multiple models in the
yeah.
multiple
Oh my
proverbial.
gosh. I think it's just it's like basically, I mean, once you crack back, I mean, honestly, I mean, even in our own prehistory, there's so much
Yeah,
we don't know. But the further
exactly.
back you go, the more that it's just that we have these little data points, and we're not able to, because there's so much missing in between that we're kind of like, oh, well, we have this thing here and we have this thing here, but we don't know quite how they all tie together yet. But then, this is why it's such a fun field, as you said. It's like you get whiplash in this field,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I love
sure.
though. I think it's great, but it's for, again, it's hard to be a curmudgeon who like really sits on your theories here, because it's like if you do
There are
that, you're
those who
getting.
do though.
I know. Bless them. They're trying really hard. So, but I think this is where, I mean, for me, I think this is the you never know what's going to happen next. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those. So it's so fun. And I mean, speaking of which, you never know what's going to happen next. In the we don't even know what we don't know. I mean, let's go to Africa. Like
I
we met
was just
entirely
thinking,
new
yeah,
relatives, right? So please lead us in. Tell us more.
absolutely. So we had quite a bit going on in Africa during the last year and the early beginning of this year. We have, let's see, where should we start? Well,
And a
why
little
don't we
watering
start with
hole in East Africa.
why don't we start with a guest that we
Yeah,
actually had on, I think it well had to be this season, earlier in
yeah,
the
it was.
season,
I
Dr.
think it's
Brian
episode six.
Vilmore. Yeah. Who was leading a team that recently discovered about 13 teeth at Ledigararu in Ethiopia, which, for those of you who don't know, is a prolific fossil site for ancient hominins. These fossils date about 2.6 to 2.8 million years old, and actually, by their morphology, represent a new yet unnamed species of what they believe is Australopithecus.
Yeah,
The species lived at the exact same time and place as the earliest Homo, with the given example of LD 351 mandible, which is believed to be a Homo habilis. That was another thing that happened. Now I'm thinking about
oh
it. We just
yeah.
discovered the most complete Homo habilis skeleton. I think that was early this year, though. So we'll talk about that later. Showed that hominin evolution was not linear, and that there were multiple species of the human family bush or tree living at the same time, even coexisting in the same environment. And it really begs the question of what uniqueness belongs to our
Mm-hmm.
genus if we have two different hominin species crossing paths on a daily basis almost 3 million years ago.
Yeah.
And I always find it interesting what parameters an individual researcher or team require in order to name a new species.
Yeah.
So, with Denisovans, we had the tooth, then we got a new genome. That wasn't enough to name a new species.
Yeah.
Denisovans technically still isn't even a species. They're Homo longi, or some we'll call them Homo. I don't remember. Oh, we'll put it in the show notes or something. But
Yeah.
so this new species, they have 12 or 13, whatever I said, 12 or 13 teeth, but
Yeah.
they're not naming a new species. And even though they are very positive, this is not Australopithecus afarensis, it's not
Yeah.
Lucy's species. There are very distinct morphological features of these teeth, which are often used as diagnostic criteria, but other teams would have jumped at the opportunity to name a new species, the whole
Yeah.
lumpers, splitters debate.
Yeah.
So it's just very interesting how I think at some point in the near future, we really should come together and put out a criteria of, okay, we have this, this, and this. It's time to name a new
Yeah.
species, or we don't have this, this, and this. We're gonna leave it,
Yeah.
ambiguous. So that was a very interesting and important find that came out of Ethiopia. And then also, and maybe we'll just go back and talk about all this in a moment, but
Mhm.
in this year, in this month, published by, I'm going to say this wrong, Zerense Alem Seged, who is a famous fossil hunter from the Afar region, also discovered a 2.6 million year old Paranthropus mandible from Mille Logoya, Ethiopia. And this actually really expands the previously known
That's
environment in
right.
which Paranthropus existed. Paranthropus, also known as the Nutcracker, was thought and probably still is believed to be a very strict specialist that died out because it couldn't adapt to its environment. However, this shows that they were much more widespread and environmentally versatile as early Homo. So
Mhm.
again, begs the question, what was so unique about us, at least at the time, or our ancestors, I should say, that allowed us to evolve continually and leave Africa and, of course, conquer the world as we now have. So there's a lot of new fossil finds that are coming out of Africa, which is amazingly good for the field. Any new
Yeah.
fossil adds a plethora of information that we were lacking before. And as you mentioned, the muddle in the middle, whichever middle we're talking about, this lessens the muddle a little bit.
Yeah.
And
But
so
while
a lot
also
going on.
complicating the story, but in like a really
True, it
fun
also
way.
complicates the story.
Because with Dr. Vilmauer, which again, I appreciated the fact that he was very cautious and didn't leap on naming something. Because I
Yeah,
mean, again, I think this is where one of the things we talked about with him is that often there's only one or two examples of something which we're classifying as a species. So the problem is, what if you get a particularly large male version and then a particularly petite female of the same species? You might think they're different species if you don't
yeah.
have enough to know, right? And this is where, so, I mean, that's one of the other things we got the proteomic results back as well from, wasn't it, was the Paranthropus a male or female? Because they were actually able to say whether it was a male or
They
female,
were,
weren't
I
they?
think it was a nail,
I think it
but
was. Yeah, and so I mean, I think this is where
a long
that
year. I feel like that
that
was a while ago, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I
that
can't
was
remember. It's all time's just like a
yeah.
flat circle at this point.
Right.
But I know, just buried my AI. But no, so I mean, I think that this is where it's really complicated, and we don't even for sure, like, this is where the Australopithecus that they just found this year with the teeth, that's like, wasn't it like 500,000 years later than they thought? Like, they already thought Australopithecus had gone extinct.
Yeah, it did
And
extend
so
later.
this was crazy. Like, this was where they thought they went extinct, and that it was only, again, it was only our own hominin family members were left. Meanwhile, turns out that this whole time they're still there. Right? And so, and now they're living alongside the earliest Homo habilis. And now my understanding was, I'm not sure if it was this or if it was Louise Leakey's team. Like, there was, I saw one just recently too, where they were talking about the fact that maybe they weren't quite as physically like us as we thought, that the skeleton actually looked a bit more archaic and a little bit less like Homo erectus. You might be able to fill that in for me better than that. That was a very loose thing, but I noticed the impression was is that maybe Homo habilis looked a little bit less like us. But again, which would make sense if it was transitioning from being one of these other species, because it's probably a split off, again, as we talked about. It's probably something that split off, and then they went one way and we went another way. Because I think for viewers and listeners who may not be aware of this, but at this point in time, we don't know who our ancestor is unless something's changed and I missed. But like, we don't actually know who it is. Like, we think it's an Australopithecus, right? Because they were more small
Yeah,
boned, and etc. The chances of us losing that massive crest on our skulls that quickly would be unlikely. So it's probably not that we're descended from one of the Paranthropus, but we're descended from one of the Australopithecus, probably, but we don't know what that means. Like, we don't know who it
Yeah.
is.
So to speak a little on what you were just
Yeah,
mentioning about Homo habilis, this is based off of the most complete skeleton that we mentioned previously of Homo habilis OH90, I believe, which is apparently nicknamed the Weaver, which was announced by Louise Leakey and her team, of
yeah,
course, from the esteemed Leakey fossil hunting dynasty. And this new skeleton, it's not very complete, but it is
no,
the most complete Homo habilis that we
yeah,
have. And it does exhibit many more features that we would classify more as ape-like
yeah,
than Homo, which also goes way back into the history of paleoanthropology to Louise's grandfather,
yeah,
um, Lewis, who
yes,
actually he and his wife Mary discovered the first Homo habilis, and they had to fight very hard, probably too hard, to designate Homo habilis, the handyman, as a Homo. Many people at the
yeah,
time would have classified it as an Australopithecine based on the cranium size. They have a very small brain, the smallest by far of any. Well, I shouldn't say that
yeah.
because I don't know how it compares to Homo florenziensis, but very small for the time. And I think honestly, if Homo habilis had been completely absent from the record until now and it was just discovered, I don't know if it would fit
Ooh.
in the Homo clade as we
Yeah,
now know it.
yeah.
Uh,
Or if it
so
might be more of that transitional,
yeah,
it's starting to exhibit traits more like a from one of our more direct ancestors, but
yeah,
like it's kind of
exactly.
that in between. Because again, it's usually things when I've seen them sort of talk about one that's a bit more ape like, it's usually they're talking about things like maybe it's a bit more curved to the hand still, like they like to climb things, or again, there's more of a sense of maybe the legs still being a little bit more bow legged,
Yeah,
like things like that, which suggests that they're still partially maybe running up trees if they need to, or just they're not fully upright the same way. Like by the time we get to erectus, we're talking about full upright, sort of from the neck down. They've very similar builds to modern humans. Is that
yes,
correct? Am I right with that? So this
yes,
is where at that point I feel like we're like, okay, we we know what's going on over here. Again, we don't actually know though which Homo erectus, like we don't have proof that we descended from Homo erectus because we don't have any genetics from them. But we think they're the most, some variant thereof
yeah,
that was running around the landscape at that point in time is our ancestor,
yeah.
basically. So somewhere in there. But you're right, that earlier one, I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, the timing of when you find something can also impact
Like
how
the
we.
politics of the
Yeah,
science at the time.
yeah,
And to speak more on the features you were just mentioning, this
yeah.
0890 skeleton has very interesting limb proportions. The arms are much longer than
Ooh,
seen previously, especially compared to their shorter legs, which implies that they would have spent more time in the trees as an arboreal or semi-arboreal
yeah,
species, which of course is more ape-like than our terrestrial hominins that follow. So this skeleton really revealed a lot about Homo habilis, which just to throw in the mix even more, they were
yeah.
not the first tool makers, not by far. We
Nope.
have they were making Oldowan tools, which is what they're called, which date to like 2.5 to 2.8 million, I want to say. That's
Yeah,
might be wrong. But in the last few years at Lomekwi, we've discovered a whole new techno complex, which is they're very simple. I mean, they're simple, but they're distinctly anthropomorphic, meaning they have been altered and
they
used.
intentionally were making a sharp cutting edge.
Exactly. They were
Yeah,
intentionally made. And these date all the way back to 3.3 million years ago,
yeah,
which completely predates the Homo species entirely. And the possible authors of those tools is either an Australopith species or potentially even a Paranthropus species.
yeah.
And a little plug here, it's not out yet. It's gonna be coming out soon, but I did an episode of The Story of Us with Dr. Kaylee Orr, Dr. Carrie Mongol, and Cody something. I'm forgetting his name, unfortunately. But it was about the discovery, and this is another big thing that happened, of the Paranthropus hands that were
Mm,
discovered last
right.
year
Yeah.
that were really showed a lot of differences. And while there's no evidence that they handled or made stone tools,
Yeah.
it also showed there was no reason they couldn't, based on the morphology and the muscle structure
Ah.
of the hands. So they're right up there with potential first tool makers, especially based on the dating and where they were. So yeah, the metal in the
And
building,
these are,
I don't know.
yeah, well, I mean, this is also, again, exactly the we don't know what we don't know. And then suddenly we find something new, or like, because again, in my mind, I've always thought of Homo habilis as being basically like a smaller erectus. And so this is kind of where you're like, oh, okay. But again, as we were speaking about, the transition is going to be less. I mean, oh man, it'd be so funny though. Like, if you think about if we were still semi-arboreal, I just like to imagine that with like long arms. Can you imagine? It'd be pretty cool. I'd like to be able to sort of dangle. That'd be nice. But sounds relaxing.
Be
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But so no, I mean but that body proportion difference isn't a big one. But if
Yeah,
we're moving
exactly. That was a
from,
big surprise.
yeah,
Hominin.
yeah,
Profound.
but now we have this one, but we only have the one.
Mhm.
So what if that one just
Was
happens to,
strange in some
right?
way. Yeah.
Like there was some
Yeah.
issue and we wouldn't know, because we only have the one. So, you know, I mean, like it's only going to get better,
Yeah.
which is the exciting part. And now because we have all these new parts of the world starting to get into this, right? I mean, look at Indonesia, look at these parts of Africa, and you'll notice that we're not just saying Westerner names. Like we're starting to see more and more local scholars and researchers and specialists, they're getting the funding, they're partnering with folks places so that because there's not enough of us. I mean, we've talked about
Yeah.
that. There's not enough of us to do even remotely a piece of the planet. So we need and want more people. And also, I mean, they're the specialists and the expert in their own regions and
Yes.
parts of the world. So in a perfect world, we can all work together, and pool of our resources and start to really open up sections of the map. And I think Indonesia, just rolling back there for a second, but also in East Africa, both of those are really great examples of where folks from different parts of the world are working together in like a really equitable and like respectful way. And we're seeing the results, and
Yeah.
it's exciting, right? And so I mean, my hope for 2026 and beyond would be to start seeing more and more of those kinds of really awesome partnerships that are really helping us write whole new chapters we didn't know were missing from the book.
Absolutely. And I think, to finish off this episode,
Yeah,
there's a large category we're going to go into now,
yeah,
but why don't we go to Europe and just kind
yes,
of summarize and go over the major discoveries, which we were talking about. There really aren't that many from this last
yeah.
year. But why don't
It's more
we
like
go
a
to
whole bunch of
Europe?
works in progress. Like it feels
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
all of our colleagues are doing really cool things, but they're like in the middle of their projects
Yeah.
right now. And it wasn't a year with like huge
Mhm.
banner discoveries in quite the same way. Though again, there was one which was kind of cool, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there were a few, I'd say three or four,
yeah,
five sort of mid to major discoveries that we can talk
yeah.
about. And I think for a lot of these, I'll let you lead on them because I know you know probably a lot more about them. However, just to maybe quick shot a few and then you can pick them
Yeah,
apart and
totally.
explain them.
Yeah,
We have a new part of Vanguard Cave in Gibraltar, a new
yeah,
chamber that was opened, revealing some interesting features. We have new types of pigment that were discovered in Germany and other areas, colors that we had not seen or
yeah,
expected. We also have supposed Neanderthal ochre crayons from, I
yeah.
believe, Crimea.
Correct. Yeah.
And we also have, I feel like I'm missing one that I wrote down.
Wasn't it the fingerprint one?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah,
There's this, I'll talk about this one a little bit because it's in the paper I just wrote.
yeah,
Um, so there's this stone. It's a stone. The stone
yeah.
itself is not believed to be modified. So that's something important to keep in mind. But going back to one of our favorite topics that we have talked about for seasons upon seasons,
Yeah.
pareidolia, the human psychological effect of we see faces in natural occurring objects or scenarios or abstract art, whatever. We see faces. We have a tendency to look for features and pick them out and go, oh, that's a face. So the stone, some argue, I know we looked at it for this episode and I don't think we really
Yeah.
agreed, but we looked at this stone and it has some features that could potentially resemble a face. But the interesting part is, I believe at 48,000, somewhere around there, there was a Neanderthal who chose this stone
Yeah.
for whatever reason. Maybe they saw a face and they put a fingerprint right where the nose should be, which adds to the idea that maybe they did see a face. And this is an example of the oldest fingerprint I believe we have. We have hands that are older, but as far as an
Yeah.
actual fingerprint, this is the oldest that I'm aware of. And again, lends to the idea of some level of Neanderthal complex symbolic behavior. Because if they did see a face and they did want to modify it to make it look even more like a face, that's something that until recently many researchers would have argued against very
Right.
strongly. So whether it's a face or not, what the purpose of the fingerprint was will of course remain lost to time. I don't know really what analysis would ever really put
Yeah.
a nail in that, but
Okay.
yeah.
The fingerprint is extremely cool. Like, I think that's really neat. I was talking to somebody the other day who was in forensic stuff, who was saying that, there even is like groupings of fingerprints, like they're genetic, they are all unique, but there are genetic traits that tend to pass down. So it would be interesting to, you never know, if we could find more fingerprints, it'd be kind of cool to see if you
Yeah.
could because there are lots of finger dots in caves though. I don't know if anybody's ever really looked at them that way, but it would be fascinating to see because there are some genetic traits that carry through fingerprints as well.
Yeah,
So there it goes.
absolutely.
And now with AI, you can run those kind of really pattern, like those really complex patterns. Be cool. But let's not get too abstract. So, I'm all team Neanderthal. I do think they made art fully symbolic. I got no problem with that at all. This face, I have a tough one with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, I just do. Yeah.
We'll have an image put up and we'll let you guys decide
Yeah.
for whatever.
Yeah. Because I think
you
here's my
want to
thing
decide.
is that one of the big transitions from a cognitive point of view when it comes to making figurative art is that when you look at we'll use a bison as an example, a two-dimensional line drawing of a bison on a wall actually does not look much like a bison. If you see one in real life, it looks like one because we have been taught to read what that is. It no longer has, it doesn't smell like a bison. It doesn't have fur. It doesn't move. Like, it is literally a weird silhouetted thing, which like that transition from three-dimensional visual in the real world to a 2D representation of something on the wall is actually kind of a big cognitive shift. And it definitely, like, I don't think other animals, like even intelligent ones, would necessarily be able to decipher a 2D line drawing of something on a wall. Like, I mean, even think like a tree, like, anything, like all these things. So this is where there's a reason why there are certain, probably not anymore because now everybody's been exposed to stuff, but back in the day, there were some groups of indigenous folks in different parts of the world who hadn't really seen photographs before, who couldn't see faces of people in the photograph because they didn't know how to read it because it was a flat thing. It didn't look to them like the people, which is really interesting. And so I think this is where seeing a face to us feels so natural. Kind of like to us, it feels incredibly natural to draw, to write, to do graphic things. But this is not like there was a time where this was an alien concept, which we didn't know how to do. So whether we realize it or not, we are all born into a world, pretty much all of us at this point are born into a world where graphic expression is around us. And we are taught from a very young age how to read it, really, right? Like from those first books, you remember that with your little one, right? Like those first books, you're almost showing them, you're repetitively showing them what these things are, and you're telling them what they are. And so this is where that flat apple in the picture doesn't necessarily look like right, like it's not, it doesn't taste like it doesn't like it, there's so many
I
things
think
are
a
different.
best example of that is the
Yeah.
heart. We have
Right.
a heart
Yeah.
that doesn't look anything
No, have you
like
seen
a
it?
heart.
It's just sort of this kind of lumpy thing with all the
Yeah,
ventricles poking out of it.
yeah,
And so yeah, it's a culturally agreed upon shape, right?
yeah,
And so this is where, with the Neanderthal, the idea of them, a nose being a round dot, it doesn't look like a nose. Like a dot's not a nose.
yeah,
We use dots in modern, sometimes when we do little emojis or like little smiley faces, we'll use a dot for a nose, but a dot is not a nose. And so I think even for that, for me, I was kind of like they made a dot in the middle of what
yeah.
they may or may not have seen as a face. But that doesn't mean that dot equals nose for Neanderthals. I think that was a really long, but I think it was important. I
Yeah,
haven't talked about that
yeah,
in a while, and I think this is where, to me, it doesn't mean it's not, but I think
right.
that's what we would have to kind of get into is, do we have a sense that Neanderthals, because everything else we have from Neanderthals that is graphic from them is non-figurative. Like
Right.
it's not, so non-figurative means it doesn't look like anything from the real world. We
Yeah.
have associated with Neanderthals, we have dots, we have big blown sort of discs where they were blowing the discs on the wall. We have small dots. We have what appear to be hands. We've got some lines going back to Crimea there. We've got we've got some cupels as well. So cupels just basically like an engraved dot. Like everything we have that is more solidly within a Neanderthal context. So meaning it's found in a way that it could not be modern humans. It must have been Neanderthals. There are all these geometric abstract markings. And so we don't have any evidence of them doing figurative art. Doesn't mean they
Right.
didn't, but just at this point in time, we don't have any evidence of them ever outlining an animal or
Right.
seeing it or representing an animal in that way. And we don't have any evidence of them representing people themselves in
Yeah.
that way. Doesn't mean they didn't. It's just that at this point, we're not tracking a pattern yet. And in fact, the pattern skews differently. So,
Mhm.
because I know in La Roche Cotard, there was also what they call the Roche Cotard mask, which was
Mhm.
one where they'd slipped a bone through something, which people said looked like a face. Now, again, I'm not really holding judgment one way or the other. I'm more just being that slightly more conservative.
Yeah.
We don't know if they cognitively understood these flat things to represent faces of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings up two things that I want to say. One, the first, little comical, on behalf of our absent co-host, Dr. George Nash, who
Yes.
one of my advisors dubs the king of interpretation when it
Oh,
comes
he
to
loves it.
he does not believe it's a face at all.
Right? And
He looked at it and
that
I
guy
think he
sees, yeah.
scoffed. Yeah, he's like, that's
Yeah.
not a face. And this is a man who will assign
Yeah.
interesting interpretations to many
Yeah.
things. So I think
Well,
that's something important.
he leans towards interpretation,
Yeah,
and he's generous with, yeah, he's sort of generous in
it's
his
generous.
interpretations.
Yes.
Yes, yes. So
And then the second thing was, and I think this is critically important to
yeah,
understanding anything Neanderthal related, forgetting our previous discussion on species designation and whatnot.
yeah,
These were not modern humans. They did
no,
not have the same brains we do. They actually had bigger brains in many cases.
yeah,
The organization of such brains is still under investigation.
yeah,
And there's no reason, besides very simple things like animal is food, that we should think they saw the world in the same way that we do. It's hard
yeah,
for us to even extrapolate our modern views and beliefs onto ancient modern humans. But then
mhm,
to do that to a separate species, I believe, is a very misconstrued idea. These
yeah,
whatever you want to call them, would have and likely saw the world in a very different way than we do.
yeah,
So to see a dot where the nose should be, they might not have experienced pareidolia the same way. They might not
mhm,
have seen a face at all. and the guy just thought it was a cool rock and wanted, this is my rock, fingerprint. Like it's just, we have to be very careful when extrapolating our cultural and societal views onto
Yeah.
people and other species that lived millennia ago.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really funny you say that because you just interviewed Dr. Ian Tattersall for the Story of Us. So a big shout out to Ian. I met him when I was a master's student and I was so excited. I was like, he was one of the first like big people in the field I met. It was really exciting.
Yeah.
But there was something in one of his books that he said that always stuck with me, and I've always held that in my head. And he was the first person I'd ever heard to really articulate it clearly, which was he said, we have to remember all these other species are aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't actually know, like we don't know how their minds worked. Like they may have
Exactly.
been similar, but similar doesn't mean the same, right?
Yeah.
Like, and this is where really stuck with me, even as a master's student, like that I was like, oh, that's a really good point. Like these are not us. They
Yeah.
might be close to us, but they're not us. Kind
Yeah.
of like, I mean, even if you think about the way a dog's brain functions compared to a wolf's, like
Mm-hmm.
there's differences. And that's only like a 25,000 year split. But
Yeah.
even so, the already we're starting to see like the wiring is starting to change based on the very different contexts in which they live. And so this is where, we don't know, just because we started to see like a face in the clouds, or we started to see these other things, as you said, we don't know if their brains looked for those kinds of patterns or saw things in that way, because we don't know if that's distinctly to us or not. And because
Exactly.
brains are soft tissue, that is like a really hard thing for us to get at, to try and ever understand. Now, we're seeing them making graphic marks, which is extraordinarily
Mm-hmm.
cool. And we're seeing them now making graphic marks across large territories too. Like this is not even just one or two sites. Like this is, I think we are seeing that Neanderthals had a tradition of making art. But maybe in some ways that's like there were some culture groups, like, because again, the modern world now is so altogether, there's almost
Yeah.
nobody left who's not touched by Western
Right.
culture and cell phones and things. But there were groups that didn't make figurative art
Yeah.
and who only made abstracted art, and who did not do that. And that's within the last like century. Or for instance, I mean, there are within the variety of humans. I remember on the linguistic side of things when I was doing a lot of linguistic research with my PhD, and it was like there are languages where they only have 3 words for colors. There's light, dark, and red. The end. Like that's a completely different framing of your world. There's a
Or
reason why
like on
they
the opposite
say,
end, where you
right?
have the
Yeah.
Inuit people have like 100 words for snow,
Yeah.
where in
So
like California you're like, it's
yeah.
snowing. But like
Yeah.
it's
Like why would you
very,
don't need a bunch of words for that, right?
yeah.
But or that's like West Coast of Canada where I'm from. Like we have a whole lot of words for rain. I can tell you about misting rain and sideways rain. Like we have lots of words like for so this is where those things are going to shape how we see the world, what we think is important. Like all of those things have such a big factor to play. And I think it's at this point in time, we just can't get ourselves that far inside their heads. Well, speaking of Neanderthals and what they could or couldn't do or perceive, I mean, obviously this new section of Vanguard Cave they've opened up, the find that was announced recently, which was the 60,000-year-old oven for making tar or glue, so to speak, for hafting weapons and things like that. So again, putting like the heads of spears onto the wooden
Yeah.
shaft or whatever, stuff like that. So that's complex though. Like they're building little ovens to do this. This isn't, this is a huge amount of pre-planning and, sort of complex multi-stepped instructions with like very specific, like the amount of fire engineering knowledge they need. Like, so this is again where I hope our viewers and listeners don't feel like just because they're different doesn't mean they're less.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the biggest things we run into is that it starts turning into a compare, well, who's better? It's not about better, it's just different, right? And so this is where I think that's extraordinary that we have Neanderthals doing such complex, deliberate behaviors at 60,000 years ago. I mean, we knew we had other examples of them doing pitch, sort of like
Mhm.
sort of from birch. I believe it was from birch, right? That they were, and again, it had to be done within a fairly narrow window. If it was too hot, it would just fall apart, and if it was too low, it wouldn't actually properly get sticky. So again, huge depth of knowledge of the things, the things around them in the world, and then to actually be creating an intentional oven to heat is a very sophisticated thing that they're doing. And so this is like engineering basically. And
Yeah.
so just because maybe they didn't make a face in a rock, they did or didn't, doesn't mean they weren't doing incredibly cool things. It's just that, yeah, it's different, and we have to take them how we find them. But to me, that
Yes.
was, I mean, in some ways, that's one of the most complex things I've seen a Neanderthal do. Like building a
I
little
would,
oven. What would you say?
if
What's
I,
what's your more
that is
complex thing?
that is
Tell me.
very, very complex. And I hadn't heard about it until you brought it up today. So I haven't
Yeah.
developed much thought about it. But if I had to just off the top of my head go, what is the what site has the highest complexity of
Yep.
potential Neanderthal behavior, I would have to say Brunical.
Right?
What they
Because of those,
were doing, yeah, what they were
you,
doing. And I just for the paper I wrote, I included the amount of material that they moved, and it was something like 2 tons of total weight that they would have moved
that's
around to make these circles of I always get this wrong.
okay.
Stalactite? Stalagmite?
Stalactite. See, if it's got the C in it, think ceiling. C for ceiling. That's how I remember it. Stalactite
Okay.
is ground. The stalactite, G is ground, C is ceiling. Remember it that way.
Okay. I still
Yeah,
don't know
yeah,
which one it was though, but
yeah.
uh
I believe it
the,
was the ones from the ceiling. It was the
okay,
stalactites. Yeah,
stalactites.
I think
So
it was.
they
Or maybe it was
literally
stalagmites. I'll have to look it up.
they're deep in a cave, deeper
Yeah,
than researchers believe would have been used for habitation.
yeah.
When there's no signs of habitation either. But we have stalactites, whatever,
Hold on. Now I'm looking
in
it up for you. I'm finding out.
in
Yeah.
a circle, and it was very clearly man-made. This was not a natural phenomenon.
No,
And were they painted at the tips, or was that a different thing?
no, I
That's a
don't think
different.
it was that. So it's stalagmites. So they came off the ground. So they were breaking off the bottom pieces. Because so basically, for viewers and listeners, it drips from the ceiling, and over time, it makes almost like look like little candles, kind of like
Yeah,
sort of drippy candles. And so they were breaking those off from the ground, and then they were carefully placing them in these huge circular. There was three of them, right?
I
Did they
believe
make,
so.
yeah, there was three different circular structures they created from these, which have absolutely no practical purpose,
Right.
and it was a huge amount of effort.
So
So
if I had to just pick out a site that was to me the
yeah,
most complex
yeah,
behaviorally, I think that would be my pick so far.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
And that one's cracking. That's like 180, 185,000. It was somewhere right in there, right?
yeah,
So very old. So
yeah,
this is like there's no humans anywhere on the horizon. This is
no,
all Neanderthals.
yeah,
There's no argument
exactly.
about that. Well, and I think it's so interesting because the only other one I can think of off the top of my head is La Garma, northern Spain, much later. There are examples of people, probably maybe one or two people, living in the dark zone of the cave. And actually, there's the old little circular structures for huts in there. Like they
Hmm.
actually lived in the cave, which is
Yeah,
wild because for people who don't know, like the caveman, cavewoman thing is kind of a misnomer.
yeah,
Like it's not
really.
for anybody who spends some time in caves. It is not a nice place to hang. They're muddy and drippy, and there's often little wiggly, squishy things running around. So
Yeah,
you know, there's better places to live. Sometimes they
yeah,
lived in the mouths of caves, but they certainly
yeah.
didn't live in these dark zones. And in Brunikel as well, these are down in the dark zone. So these are very
Which also
intentional.
implies they needed a light source to bring in. I
Yeah,
think there's evidence
yeah.
of that at Vernon Hill as well.
Yeah.
But
So they're
yeah,
they're having to bring in, so again, Lagarma, but that's much later. But they're pretty sure that people were actually, one or more people was living in the cave, and then there's tons of evidence of them making all sorts. I almost picture them as like the Leonardo da Vinci of like the Paleolithic, in there madly, because there's so many figurines and other portable pieces, and then there's art all over the ceiling right there too.
Yeah.
But again, that's 150,000 years later, and it's
Right.
modern humans with a long tradition of art making behind them. Bruniquel with its circles and these intentionally broken off stalagmites. It's like unprecedented at that point in time. We don't have
Yeah.
any evidence of them doing that, and I don't like it. Yeah, there's no practical purpose for why you would do that. And so this is where it goes back to that really, well, what were they doing? Why were they doing it? Right. But it definitely shows sophistication, pre-planning, the ability to even the ability to make a circle, which sounds funny, but like it's a thing. And so, maybe a 65,000 year old oven to make tar isn't that far outside what's possible then. But it's just, again, so with Vanguard, just so folks understand, Vanguard's a cave they've known about for a long time down in Gibraltar, but they just found a new sealed off chamber. And so this is where sometimes even in caves that we think we know well, new things get found. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's again where, like, so speaking of, things that we didn't know that we would know, like there was another section of Vanguard Cave just waiting to be opened up. And so, this is where I think, where the folks in Portugal that you're working with, I mean, they're finding new stuff in Ocreza all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's lots, there's so many cool discoveries. So who knows what else? I mean, what else Neanderthals might have been doing that we just may not have have found those sites, right? Because this is where, again, I mean, we're like, what percentage of sites would you even say we know of? Like 1%? Like, we don't know much.
You have to think, if we're speaking Neanderthals, the latest sites would be about 42,000 years ago. That's a lot of time for the Earth to swallow up
everything.
Everything. Yeah, everything.
And especially if it's been through like glacial cycles, because what happens is that sometimes the calcite literally drips down, and like, say there's a bit of a rock fall at the entrance to a cave, the calcite can drip down, and over that many millennia, it actually creates a smooth surface that looks like there was never an entrance there.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is where, like we really don't know what we don't know. And like, this is our case, we really don't. And, so I think it's like, I would say, I mean, if you think about how long Neanderthals lived in Europe for, and how many camps they would have made, and how many sites they would have lived in, I mean, we know nothing. Like we really don't. Like I mean, how many Neanderthal sites? We don't. Like, it's so small that it's and yet it's an order of magnitude better than I think what we know in Africa when it comes to the deeper ancestors, where sometimes it's like we have 5 teeth and that's the species, right? But still, it's like the amount of information we have is so spotty right now that I feel like every time, like, we're like, what? That's amazing. Like it's again, this is what makes it feel so cool. This is why it's even just fun reviewing. Like, this is probably over the course of about the last 14 months, I think, because a couple of the stories I've mentioned, I think, were from late 2024 as well. But it's like literally in less than a year and a half, all of these things we're talking about happened in our field, which is bonkers. And then another one, speaking of Neanderthals and what they could or couldn't do, if we transition from there to Crimea, so this is like southern Ukraine, down in the Black Sea area. Like,
real quick before we get into that, I just found a little factoid that goes with what you were just saying about how little we have found. Now, these numbers are, numbers are numbers, so we'll never get this, arguable. Yep. So over the 400,000 years of Neanderthal existence in Europe, it is believed, according to this research, that at any given time, there was up to 3,000 to 7,000 individuals. And if you extrapolate that over the 400,000 years, that's about 70 million to 100 million Neanderthals ever. Now, we only have 300 to 500 individuals by remains.
Yep.
So,
like
what, 95, 98% of Neanderthal history is just under or gone. So,
And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, and that's like, I'm just going to give a little shout out to our new friend Michelle that we just made in Italy. So he is a professional speleologist, caver, and amongst other things, and he likes to go find collapsed caves. And he contacted me in a couple months ago, 2 months ago. So he actually dug his way in, because what it is, so people understand, is that when you see sinkholes, those can be the old location where there used to be a
Yeah.
cave, and then it sinks and it leaves kind of a bit of a sinkhole in the landscape. So he's in Italy, and he was out doing his thing. He likes to find these caves. He dug his way into a cave. There is what appears to be a Neanderthal chopper in there, and there are cupels in a wall. And this is a fully sealed cave that nobody has probably been in for a very, very, very long time. And so again, this is like, it's a part of Italy where there's not even any known caves with markings of any kind in them. Like, this is a
Yeah.
whole other, like, so this is where, like, how many collapsed caves are there with stuff?
Yeah. Or
You
just, I
know,
mean,
like,
you think of the underwater one.
oh, Cosque or Cosquer,
Okay.
depending on who
Like
you talk to.
how
Yeah.
many caves are on? I actually thought about this as a potential theme for my master's thesis. It's just so there's actually very few Neanderthal sites in Portugal. Very few, like maybe one
Yeah.
or two or three. But we know they were here, and Iberia
Yeah.
was the last stronghold of the Neanderthals, as far as we know. And looking at sea level change since the last ice age, there's a very high chance there's
Mhm.
multiple caves or sites that are now underwater along the Portuguese coast that very likely could possess quite a bit of Neanderthal information. So
Yeah.
again, going back to the earth has swallowed up
Yeah.
this these sites, and they might be rediscovered, they might never be
Yeah.
rediscovered. We just have to keep that open mind
Yeah.
that we
Because
don't
just
know.
because, what is it? The absence of evidence,
Yes.
right, is not actually the absence of evidence. Like, just because we don't have it doesn't mean it doesn't
Yeah.
exist, right?
That,
And I mean, look at Lascaux. A dog fell down a hole and they found Lascaux. Like, it's this is our field in a nutshell, right? Like, we're like wandering, everything's, bloop, a dog falls down a hole, they go to rescue the
speaking of
dog, they
that,
find
I
one of
saw
the
a
most extraordinary sights.
hysterical Facebook
Yeah.
post about
What was it?
Lascaux like the other week.
Okay.
You could tell it was totally AI, and they had no idea what they were talking about. They're like, a robot found Lascaux Cave.
No way.
And the
I love
funny
it.
thing is, the dog's name was Robot, but it didn't say
Oh my
a dog
gosh.
named Robot found the cave. It was really like a robot found the cave, and
Oh, that's
it
classic.
was
But
it was
imagine, like, if that were to make it through the archaeological record. This is how things get all messed up, eh? Oh, that's
yeah,
too funny. Yes, a dog named Robot, rather important information. But
yeah,
but yeah, I
yeah.
mean, like, so this is where they're everywhere, and yet we don't know where most of them are.
Mhm.
And in places like in the Middle East is one of the reasons why I enjoy working over here, or anywhere where there's deserts, is
Yeah,
that the these sites are still partially exposed usually,
yeah,
rather than being buried under dirt, forests, villages, cities. Like, the landscape has changed and now nobody knows it's there anymore.
exactly.
um, so this is, yeah, that some areas are going to be a lot easier to find things than others, right? But this is where now, because that's a good point though, I'm glad you mentioned all that, but now I'm going to drag us over to Crimea,
Please
which
do.
again is an area where I didn't even know Neanderthal were that far east. Like, that's pretty far east. We're on the Black Sea at this point. Like, I would have
Yeah,
almost considered that to be into like Denisovan type territory. So, because it's not like, from there, I'm trying to look. I mean, obviously, we know they made it all the way to. I mean, it is a fair bit farther to Denisova Cave, but still, like, when we actually think
yeah.
about,
It's
but
on the
with our,
south, it's pretty far south.
yeah, it's
So
pretty far south. But yeah, and also, I mean, who knows? It could have also been another spot where humans could have met them too, because there was lots of early Homo sapiens moving around that Black Sea region. The Caspian and the Black Sea were very, very popular transit areas from what we can see, because of the big river valleys. Like, everybody follows river valleys is basically what is
yeah,
happening, is that everybody's wandering along the river valleys. Um, and so this was a really exciting study by Francesco Derrico and his colleagues at Bordeaux and elsewhere in Europe. But Francesco is, I know, one of the main authors. And he's been, of course, incredibly important to the field when it comes to ochre and like a lot of the early symbolic behavior, sort of
Hmm.
pre-modern human. And this was a really cool study because they were doing the experimental archaeology, and they've identified that several sites in Crimea that were definitely Neanderthal sites, the ochre is worked in a way that it appears they're being used as crayons. And so crayons, again, is not, this is not then being used for some, like it appears they were being used for some artistic or symbolic type activity. And so, I mean, obviously I'm saying symbolic a little loosely because we don't know what they were doing with it,
Right.
but they were doing something where they were trying to get the ochre, they were trying to grind the ochre off of it or using it to draw or to do something intentional. And from the team's point of view, and again, and these guys really do, I mean, they're the ones who did Blombos. This is like many of the same team members from that. Like they've done lots of very important sites. They've also done a lot of work on Neanderthal artifacts, which are
Hmm.
have engraved marks on them and other things like the raven bone and all sorts of cool stuff. So these guys know their stuff. And so they have argued that that could be evidence of them having some sort of paint kits or being used as for, again, we don't know if they were, just because they were making pigment doesn't mean they were painting cave walls. Like
Right.
they could have also been just as easily painting themselves,
Yeah,
or
embodied or yeah,
or
exactly.
painting animal hides, or rocks that were outside, which we would never know because it's not going to last that long out in the open. But I think this again goes back to sort of the point we're talking about, which is that we have lots of Neanderthals doing interesting things, but like different interesting things in different areas. And so,
Exactly.
we've got them they're doing something with ochre. This is also a region though where, I mean, we talked about this in a previous episode, but the Makokian culture, which is the description of the tool type that these folks seem to have, these were, I believe, the Neanderthal were descended, because again, we have the genetics from some of these as well. So this is where, again, now we're able to like start braiding together multiple strands of evidence from different directions. And that it's thought that these, again, are sort of the probably more, they came from the West, and they're part of the Western Neanderthal branch. So actually related to Thorin, I believe, from Mundrum
Yes.
Cave. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so this is where, so maybe Thorin and them didn't like their neighbors that laughed, but the other ones who laughed, are from that same lineage, and they managed to work their way all the way across to the Crimea. So they're in a whole different section. These guys, there's lots of interesting evidence of there being linear marks on bones as well that are
Yeah.
associated with many of these sites. So it's like, it seems like, again, we're starting to build up more of a cultural tradition, like these
Yes.
cultural practices. And that, again, they seem to group with certain genetic groups as well, which sounds like culture groups. And so
Yes.
going back to the sort of the very first thing we were saying about Denisovans and Neanderthals as we rolled from, Asia back over, was that these are not monolithic groups. Like
Right.
one group of Neanderthals might have been really good at engineering, but maybe they weren't doing as much. Maybe they weren't doing much with ochre. And then there's other groups that maybe were doing things with ochre and had different traditions. And so I think for me, looking to the year and the years ahead, I mean, I think it's one of the things, I know you're interested in it too, which is, can we start to identify different Neanderthal cultural groups and then start to actually understand what was the repertoire of their behaviors,
Yes.
but not presuming all Neanderthals knew the same things.
Right.
Which,
Just
yeah,
cultures. I mean,
yeah,
just the practice of death and burial in modern human cultures varies from I'm going to
yeah,
put my loved one in this spot in the ground and I'm going to pay tens of thousands of dollars to do that and maintain it, to
yep,
literally I'm going to leave them on top of a mountain to be eaten by birds. I mean,
yep,
we have literally both in modern
yeah,
society. This
yeah,
either of these are um, practices of the past that have not
no,
continued. They both
no,
still have. So
yeah,
why wouldn't they have cultures? Why wouldn't they have different
yeah,
beliefs depending on where they were? Why, if you have a group in this area, and let's have an extreme example,
yeah,
there's a volcano. The Neanderthals in that group are going to have views on that volcano. We'll never know what they
yeah,
are, but they'll have views
no,
on them. Versus Neanderthals who've never seen a volcano, that's not going to be in. their
No,
minds at all. You know,
no,
it's not, they don't have
no.
TV to see different places.
No, it's
You
not
know,
part of their reality. It's just it doesn't
yeah,
exist for them. But for the other Neanderthals, I mean, and again, that could become an important part of their story, depending on how close up close and personal they were with that
yeah,
volcano.
yeah,
So
exactly.
you know, so I think this is where we no matter what, I mean, they are people in their own right capable of complex thinking and planning, and they would have had memories, and they obviously taught each other things that was not just to survive, because there's this other layer of things going on as well. And I mean, I think this is what one of the big things, like certainly with Neanderthals, I feel like this was a good year for really adding more layers of evidence to the idea of them being these very complete, if you want to call it that, but like culturally complete individuals who just are different than us, not
Right,
better or worse, just different.
right.
And then I think here, right towards the end of the year, I feel like Denisovans are now suddenly stepping up a little bit too. But again, it would make sense. Like they split from Neanderthals around 400,000 years ago, as per Simon Los Huesos. But, they were living together. And as you mentioned earlier, I mean, Denny had like one Neanderthal parent and one Denisovan parent.
Yes,
And
they were
and
fit.
so
Yeah.
so literally they were interbreeding. They were obviously capable of interacting. I believe there's quite a bit of ochre that's come out of Denisova cave, but it's only in archaeological layers at this point. It hasn't come up. I would be so interested to take D-Stretch into that cave. That's like seriously, like it
Yeah, that,
remains like a high level goal for me.
yeah, for
So I
sure.
hope at some point things can calm down for everybody in that region, so something like that might be possible. But like who knows what Denisovans, maybe they were making cool claw-like hand stencils in the caves. Or again, now we have, no matter what, we have extraordinarily old art sitting in Indonesia, which just starts to push back the age of art in general. Because keep in mind too, those handprints weren't the first thing those people made.
Yeah, exactly.
Like this is not the start point. This is obviously, there is a tradition to how they're doing this. And I think that's what we often have to think about too, is that we're often not seeing the very first try at something.
Yes.
Like we're seeing it already as a tradition in process. Like it's underway when we're catching our glimpse of what they're doing. So I mean, like, yeah, like I think this is where, but we're talking of like thousands of kilometers of territory, as you said, where we don't really know much. And so this is, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what's going to come out in the years ahead.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention, just because falls into that category of, I knew it. Was so interesting after, so long of, like when I was an undergraduate, like all the books that you read from like the 20th century when it comes to cave art, certainly in Europe, because of course that tends to be where most of the study had taken place before, was always that, the understanding was cave art, it's either engraved or it's painted, and painted art is either red or black. The vast majority of it is red or black.
Yeah.
And then there's a little bit of yellow, a little bit of brown, a little bit of purple in some regions, or pink, which is just sort of variations on the ochre. And then a little bit of kaolin clay, a bit of white somewhere, but mostly black or red, the end. And the other colors were just not there. But as we just talked about, just because there's an evidence, like there's an absence of evidence, does not mean the evidence is actually absent. We just haven't
Yes.
found it.
Exactly.
And so this is where to have two papers within a couple months come out, both of which showed really clearly that they knew how to extract blue pigments
Mhm.
from things. And completely different sources. So there's a cave in Georgia, Zwazwana Cave, which is a very well-known cave for its early flax and signs of weaving and other really cool stuff from 34-ish
Yeah.
thousand years ago. On closer inspection, they realized that some of we already knew that there was some pink and some blue in there, which was so fun. I love the idea of it being colored. But they were able to show that, I think it was on some of the tools or maybe on like a grinding thing, that it looks like it came from the indigo plant. And
Mm.
so that's exciting. So that, of course, makes that beautiful blue that we think of when we think of the Celts or the Picts with their blue faces. That's the same type of blue pigment. So, they had figured out how to extract blue from things in the environment around them. And then meanwhile, we go to Germany to a paper by, so Izzy's awesome. Izzy's one of the main authors on that paper. And so she had happened to notice that there appeared to be little blue flecks on some portable, like on a portable palette thing, which they thought maybe was a lamp of some kind, but now they think it might have been a mixing board, like a little mixing palette for paint. And in that case, they had intentionally grabbed azurite, which is it's got copper in it. That's what gives it the blue tone. And there are several spots in Germany where it is available at or near surface level. And so where the blue existed, they were harvesting the blue, whether that was indigo plants, whether that was coming from an actual mineral source like azurite. So here, and at the time when we were talking about the stuff out of Georgia, I'd flagged the sites in Siberia, which is known as Malta, but not Malta to be confused with the island. It's MAL''TA, and that's a really important Paleolithic site in Siberia. And there they had both green and blue on their figurines. So their figurines were painted, and also with red. So they had multiple colors they were using. So it's like out of sort of like, that one's a bit older. That one they've known for a while, but that one had been a bit of an outlier because it was over in Siberia. So now suddenly in Western Europe as well, we, sort of middle to west now, we've got this huge range where they're using blue pigment if they have access to it. And they're creating access to it by looking for it in a way. Like this is where they're processing it with the indigo plants. They're having to go get it because I think there was like 4 places they'd seen that they could source it from. So this is very intentional collection of blue.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And as Ugo was saying, because we had Ugo on the show, of course, who specializes, who specializes in pigments and different colors and all of the science and geochemistry behind it. So we were agreeing that not all the colors are going to last on the wall the same length of time. Depends on what they're made of. Depends how they're.
That opened my mind. I'm like,
see,
yeah.
We don't know what we don't know, right? Like that idea of like, well, wait, if this blue indigo melts off a wall easily, like if it's more water soluble or something, I don't know if it is, but that style, or if they had some sort of green or some other color, but
exactly, that really got me thinking. And again, the episode with Hugo might be out before this one. We'll just see how things line up. So be sure to watch that either before or after this. He's an expert on pigment analysis and, like you said, all the geochemistry. And he posited this idea that, like you were saying, what if there was a green pigment that's just gone now? And, in Paleolithic art, there's either no or almost no representation of landscapes, plants, things like that. What if there were, and they're just gone? What I mean, what if
we don't know what we don't know, because it should be there. Like
it should be
by right. And when you look as well, like basically all of the more recent traditions, and by recent I'm still talking like, say 10,000-ish years ago, but recent's a little flexible when it comes to so it's all in your perspective. But more other examples of rock art from around the world, they have the natural world, they have village scenes, they have life. Like there's so much more, like, which is where the idea of Paleolithic art fitting into these rigid categories of like animals, humans, and geometric signs never made sense. Like I get the fact that it's a way for modern researchers to organize them. Like again, if you had talked to Paleolithic people, they would not have been like, oh, we have 3 categories of image and we organize this. It's a modern human, like it's us doing it. But it always felt like there was a super weird gap. Like where's the natural world? Or like I'm thinking even in like Lascaux, there's a really interesting example where there's a whole bunch of deer heads. And the way that they're done, they've suggested that either it's meant to be what deer heads look like above grass, or possibly it could be what they looked like. Or was it reindeer? It might be reindeer. So it's a cervid. I'll stick with that. I think it might have been reindeer. But they may have been either swimming across a river, or they were in high grass, or they were doing something that they wanted to have their heads up. Maybe like they used natural features in the cave, which kind of helped give it the idea of there being a line there. But maybe that was colored in some way as well. Or, there's some other examples where things almost look like they could be a plant or a tree, but maybe we're just missing other colors that would have
Yeah.
made it make sense. Or I think Ugo was mentioning hands. There's
Right.
images
Yeah.
where hands are missing,
Yeah.
and maybe they're not really missing. Maybe they were just made with a different color, which doesn't have the same
That,
lasting power. Yeah.
yeah. So
So that,
that's truly
yeah,
a fascinating aspect of rock art that really needs to be
yeah.
explored.
Yeah. Well, this is new, right? Because this is all
Yeah.
comes from Raman spectrometry. So really, I mean, Ugo was one of the first starting around 15 years ago. So this is where most of the 120-ish years that we've been studying this, like they didn't have access to
Yeah.
these techniques and technologies. And so now we're learning new things. And this is where one of the goals of the team, as we're talking, we were brainstorming what we wanted to do in the next year or two, is to start doing more multispectral and hyperspectral scanning, so that we can see if kind of like with certainly with Izzy's paper there, where she found the azurite, like it was tiny little bits, like just in the cracks, and it's like, what if there's tiny bits left on the cave walls?
Yeah.
And so if we can actually scan at the elemental level, then we might be able to find it. So maybe it does exist. And maybe again, it's just that different preservation, the differential preservation between the two is the only reason why we didn't know it existed. Um,
Yeah. And
so yeah, I'm
speaking of
curious to
that,
see. Yeah.
yeah, maybe we'll have Sarah on for an episode because she's an expert in recording rock art.
Yes, she is.
It's very difficult to do these things.
Yes.
Thinking of the conservation effort that has to go into it. You can't just,
Yep.
oh, here's a rock painting. I'm going to scrape it off and we're going to analyze it in the lab. You can't
No,
do that. There's very strict rules and
that's how you
methodologies.
don't get invited back.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of people,
Yeah.
I don't think, and I don't even think I realized this really until recently, how scientific rock art study is.
Oh yeah.
It's not interpretive, perhaps, as a lot of
Yeah.
people think. Oh, I see a painting. What does it mean? Oh, okay. No, there's a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
actual hard science that goes
Yeah.
into the analysis of it.
Yeah. And then even I mean, I was working with them in Rising Star, and so I
Mhm.
got to see Sada and Hipólito, who, I mean, I was watching them in action, and I mean, again, it's amazing watching those two, because they're both so professional at the recording and doing the photogrammetry and all that.
Yeah.
And it's like they're looking to be able to, because I did some macro like photography for them in there as well, looking specifically at cut marks, right? Like, what is a natural crack versus what is a cut mark? And like these are all microscopic, like the amount of detail, but also trying to capture these images on a rock wall
In the
properly is
dark.
really
Yeah.
hard, right? And you don't want to have too much light in there, and trying to also, especially if it's an engraving, like that's a whole different animal too, because engravings can be really difficult to properly record in a cave where it's
Yeah.
so shadowed. Like there's a lot going on. Like, and then it's a whole different set of experiences outside, where you've been like at Okreza. Capturing engravings outside well is also hard. It's almost easier to do it at nighttime so you can control the light.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nighttime. That's a
Yeah.
whole other thing we can talk about, is just how
Yeah.
interesting engravings are, where they can
Yeah.
only be seen by the winter sun. They can only be
Yeah.
seen by the summer sun. They can only be seen at
Like at 4 o'clock
sunset.
in the afternoon,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah,
they get the
exactly.
right angle on it. Oh yeah, no, and the panels are like that. It's wild that,
Yeah.
but then in a cave, the worst one, oh, so annoying. I was a site called Bernafal in France, where it was like we went back 3 times because we were trying to. There's actually an asterisk in the cave, which is highly unusual. There's almost no asterisks, and so this was really important. I really wanted to capture it well, and the stupid engraving kept not capturing properly. And bless Monsieur Bernafal, he's the cave owner. He let me keep. I was like, I'm so sorry. Can we come back one more time and just try again? Like, oh, because it was, again, I really wanted a good shot of it because there's so few asterisks. Like, I was like, this is really important. We can use this one then as an example. But it was like, yeah, it took 3 different trips to the cave.
Yeah.
Luckily, he was very patient, lovely. But like, I'm really sorry. So that's the thing. Yeah, the things people don't think about, right? But no, I'm so excited. I mean, excited as you're moving into doing more field work, which will be really cool. And we got some really great projects lined up for this year, and we have some pretty exciting. I will, without saying too much, the First Art team, we have some pretty exciting paleogenetic stuff coming out at some point in the coming months. So I look forward to talking about that. And yeah, I mean, I think considering everything that's already happened last year, I mean, who knows what could happen next, right? So yeah, no, I'm always excited. I'm always happy, and I mean, yeah, that's why the field's so fun, and why we managed to talk for such an incredibly long time today.
Yeah. At this point, you guys probably are listening to part 2 of the recap 2025. And we want to
thanks for taking the ride with us.
Yeah, we want to thank everyone for taking the ride with us on this extraordinary review of the world of our ancestors over the last year. And I think, we'll conclude here. We'll wrap it up. We've talked about so much, and we'll make sure it's all in the description. You can maybe jump around to the stories you want to hear more about. And it was a huge year for archaeology and anthropology and human origins. And we look forward to the year ahead.
Exactly. And to sharing it with all of you too.
Absolutely.
As exciting new things come. So stay tuned.
My favorite. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yay.
All right, guys.
2026.
Yes, 2026. Let's make it this year. All right. Thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to leave a like. It really helps us out. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it's free and helps us spread our open access education farther and wider, which is always the goal. We're not gatekeepers. We don't like to keep. I think it should be obvious. We don't like to keep.
At this point, I think we like to blabber about it. It's more to the point. Who wants to listen to us?
Yeah. So please like and subscribe, and we will see you. Well, I guess next season, because
see you in the next episode.
Yeah. All right. We'll see you guys later. Bye.